All right, now we're going to look at part 2 of this week's assignments, and that has to do with the judicial branch and a process called judicial review that is very important when it comes into terms of our Constitution. So we looked at the amendment process in part 1 of these slides, but there are other ways that the Constitution has developed and changed and can expand over times other than these so-called 27 amendments. In 1803, in the Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison, the Chief Justice, I remember there are 9 Supreme Court justices, and we're going to look at the Supreme Court / judicial branch in depth more in the future. But the Chief Justice, John Marshall, wrote for a unanimous Supreme Court that these judges have the power to decide whether or not acts of Congress, the executive branch, state laws violate the Constitution. All right, so let's say Ohio passes a state law and somebody is worried that it violates their First Amendment rights. You can bring this in court through the process of judicial review. And these judges have the final say about what the meaning of the Constitution is. Their job is to interpret and to review these laws and to make sure it aligns with the Constitution. All right, so some images here about the judicial review process. So the power to declare what the Constitution means and whether the actions of the government officials that pass these laws violate the Constitution is known as judicial review. It is a very critical process to protect our freedoms. Judicial review is also the power of the courts, of a country to examine the actions of, like I said earlier, the legislative and executive branch of government to determine whether or not such actions are consistent with the Constitution. So laws that are passed in local and state, jurisdictions need to align with our federal Constitution. All right, there is a pretty cool video here. It's not required to watch, but is a helpful guide on judicial review. But in this Marbury versus Madison, they decided that the judicial department, their duty was, and their job was to say what the law is or to interpret its meanings. All right, so that's why the Supreme Court here in this image is watching over Congress and the executive branch, the White House here, and determining, are they following federal law? Judges are in the best position to declare what the Constitution actually means and to interpret it. By striking down laws that conflict with the Constitution, these judges in the Supreme Court, they preserve the nation's fundamental law and the will of the people. Oh, my apologies. All right, so check out that video if you need some additional help. So part 2 of the assignment this week has to deal with judicial review. Here's a pretty interesting judicial review Supreme Court case, in the past year. It's called Engel versus Vitelli. A New York state law required that public schools to open each day with the Pledge of Allegiance and a non-denominational prayer in which the students recognize their dependence upon God. The law allowed students to absence themselves from the activity if they found it objectionable. But a parent sued on behalf of his child, arguing that the law violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment as made applicable to the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. What they ruled was that the majority, Justice Black, he ruled that school-sponsored prayer violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The majority say that the provision allowing students to absent themselves from the activity did not make the law constitutional because the purpose of the First Amendment was to prevent government interference with religion. All right, so they ruled that schools cannot require you to say a prayer. All right, this is an example of judicial review. There are many examples of judicial review. One was Texas versus Johnson. This was about the burning of the flag. You could take a look at this on your own time. Now I'm going to talk about the actual assignment for the week. So part 2 assignment, based on judicial review, you're using the same slides as you did for part 1 and a different video in order to complete the research assignment below. These 8 questions, all right, make sure you're extensive and you write complete sentences with these. All right, so the video is about Gideon versus Wainwright, another example of judicial review. You need to watch this video in full to answer these questions. And I gave you hints as where to find some of these questions for the ones that are contrasting with our slides. All right, so if you have any questions, please email me about this week's work.